Thank you very much, and welcome to this niche, but hopefully interesting session. So today we're going to look at some work studying data portals and also think about how we might reimagine them, as well as the possibility for a new phase of kind of collaborative research. We're particularly interested in how research on data portals might inform doing them differently. So we'll start by looking at research on what open data portals are, who and what they are for, what they do, and why. And for anyone in the previous panel, it was very interesting to see different perspectives on civil society interest in data on the one hand, and the situation of councils and the different pressures they're under, which situates data portals at the interface between civil society and data reusers and data publishers. And then we'll have some discussion looking at what might be next for data portal research. We have a pad, just in case any of you would like to add notes or comments or questions that we could come back to in the discussion at the end. We thought that rather than just doing that at the end, it would be good to leave this open so you can kind of add things there as we go. So you can type in that URL or scan the QR code to get the pad, and we'll bring that up at the end. I'll just give you a moment to scan it for anyone who wants to. So we'll start with Elena.
Okay, so hello, welcome back from lunch. The problem with seeing so many familiar faces in the audience is that if I say something silly, everyone will know and everyone will tell people about it. But there we go. Yes, so my name is Elena Simpel. I'm the Director of Research at the Open Data Institute. I'm also a colleague of Jonathan's at King's College London. So I'm going to start us off with a summary of, I think, around 10 years of research that I have done around open data portals. And my background in this comes from a publishing side. So I'm a computer scientist. So I worked in linked data, in knowledge graphs. These are all technologies that help publishers of open data release their data in a way that makes it, at least in theory, easier for consumers like downstream applications and developers to use that data in a range of scenarios. And the thing with open data, as you probably know, is that when you publish it, you don't have the one use case in mind. That's very different from, say, an enterprise setting where you may want to make a data set available for your colleagues from a different business unit to be able to use it. In an open data world, you have to think of a whole range of use cases and think about how you design the technology and the ecosystems around open data so that you're able to support, to make it easy for a range of use cases and stakeholders to use that data. So for this reason, sort of 10 years ago, I have started looking at what I call user-centric data publishing. And that started in the context of a project I was doing at the time for the European Commission. It was a project called, at the time, the European Data Portal. So this was one of the flagship projects in open government data in Europe, where the idea was to build not just a portal, but a portal that indexes the open data sets from many public administrations all over Europe. And I'm not talking just about national open government data portals, I'm also talking about portals at lower levels in public administration, so city portals, regional portals, and so on and so forth. Over time, so the project is still going. Over time, what is now called data-europa.eu has indexed almost, I think, 1.8 million data sets, depending on who's counting and how well the metadata of those data sets is maintained. But a huge number of data sets. So it provides that sort of one-stop entry if you're looking for any type of open government data set in over 36 countries. So it goes way beyond the 27 member states. So that was the context in which I was doing this, this research on user-centric data publishing. And one of the first things we've done with my colleague Joanna Walker at the time is to talk to users of these data sets and to technology providers of data publishing technologies, and to establish a number of design principles for so-called user-centric data publishing. So without having a specific use case in mind, what can portals, developers, and data publishers do to encourage use and impact of open data? And these are the 10 guidelines in written form. So it starts with thinking about how you structure, how you design that portal so that you organize for use and for use cases and categories of use cases rather than publishing categories. Then promoting use through data storytelling. And community building. And there's lots of interesting research and best practices from open source communities, which are all present here at the event, that can teach open data publishers about how to set up these open data communities and how to encourage data storytelling so that it is more accessible for potential users who perhaps don't know how to do data science and process data sets to think what that open data resource could do for them. Invest in making that data easier to discover. So when someone doesn't know where the data is published, on which portal, they can use search engines and other technologies to find it. Good quality metadata. I mean, I can talk forever about good quality metadata. To enhance reuse. So when someone is looking at a data set without having to download it and curate it, they have a good understanding whether that data set is for them or not. Adopt standards to ensure interoperability. Again, that's to reduce the costs of reuse, which is especially important if you're a small business who wants to use that open data alongside other types of resources. Collocate tools, so that a wider range of users can be engaged with. So rather than assuming that you put your files on a portal and someone downloads them and they will have to think about what sort of tools, Excel or more advanced ones, would be needed to derive insights from that data, make it easy for them. Collocate tools so that they can try things out already on a portal. Link data sets to enhance value. There's very few use cases in open data that rely on that one single open data set. In practice, what happens, people will look at different data sets, some open, some shared, and will need to combine them. Be accessible by offering options away from sort of technical means like CSV downloads and APIs. Collocate documentation. So people should be able to understand through metadata and documentation immediately whether that data is for them and for the use case or not. And last but not least, be measurable. A data portal is a piece of technology, and part of being user-centric is related to understanding what users do on a portal and adjusting and adapting the design to support those user journeys. So those are the 10 principles. What did we do next? Well, we thought these are great, and we certainly have created a pretty picture around them, and we received excellent feedback at the time from the community. But we wanted to provide additional guidance so that data publishers and data portal managers can operationalize that guidance. And to do that, we were inspired by this 5-star scheme that we know from Link Data. Which I'm not going to introduce now, but basically is that idea that you can publish data in a variety of ways, and the more stars you get, the more you would, at least on a technical side, encourage reuse. So we've adopted that sort of scheme for those 10 principles, and we have provided guidance on what it means to achieve 1 star, for instance, on collocate tools, and what it means to achieve 5 stars on be accessible. And there is a report that we have published about it. If you're interested, you can find it on the dataeuropa.eu website. Here's some examples very quickly. So this is organized for use. So you know when you go on a data portal, you find a number of categories. There is a question around where do those categories come from? Are they derived from, say, a selection of queries that we have logged? And we know that this is what people actually search for. So we derive those categories from that sort of data. Or maybe we run focus groups or other types of research to sort of understand what forms of what is it that people are looking for, right? So the first time when they're looking for a data set about education and they go to your portal, how do you organize that in a way that makes it easy for that person to find that data set immediately? So we went from linking a data set to the metadata to providing previews of data sets to support sense making, to providing recommendations for related data sets, to enable users to review and rate the data sets, all the way down to linking to other data sets and providing additional qualitative information. Collocate documentation is the second example, very, very similar, ranging from well, there is no documentation, but there is metadata, so you still get 1 star, all the way to providing that documentation in an accessible way so that people can know immediately from the documentation what the data could be used for and with which tools. And then at the time, we looked at the extent to which existing open government data portals were meeting some of those targets. And that was not with the purpose to come up with some sort of leaderboard and shame people or portal owners, but to get an understanding of which of those 10 dimensions are actually challenging in themselves and require perhaps more research or a different way to think about technology design. And for this reason, so when we picked these data portals, we wanted to have portals that have varied open data maturity levels to try to understand exactly where those systemic pain points were. And they were in 3 areas. Be discoverable, so beyond the search functionality that existed on the portal, collocate documentation in a useful, accessible way, and be measurable. So that was basically, that led to a set of guidances and an agenda for additional research to address those 3 challenge areas. Then what did we do next? Well, we started thinking, what are other ways to convince publishers of the importance of those guidance? Because each of these measures that we were suggesting requires additional investment, requires a change in practices in data publishing. So the second piece of research I'm going to talk about is about trying to find an evidence base for the importance, for the impact of implementing these sort of guidance. And we have looked at all the guidance available beyond what we have provided, and there's lots of it. So these are just examples, for instance, in the area of fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. And then we try to pin that guidance down to evidence of use and impact. We could not do that on an existing open government data portal mostly because we don't have enough data about how those portals are used, and those portals also don't publish much usage data themselves. So we looked at a different type of technology. We've looked at GitHub. GitHub is used in many ways, mostly for software, but also as a data portal. So at the time, I think this was 4 years ago, they released a corpus of 65,000 GitHub repositories where we have found in excess of 1.4 million data sets. Now in GitHub we have lots of information, access to a lot of information about which of those data sets are very popular, which of those data sets receive contributions beyond the person or the account that published them. And we basically try to link features of these data repositories, of these data publishing projects, to the guidance we have found in the literature. And we have looked at a number of attributes. So we looked at the size of the data set, the quality of the documentation, the quality of the data set itself, and we use some proxies for that, the availability of reviews, the availability of documentation, and so on and so forth. And we came up with recommendations for publishers. Again, linked to those 10 principles. Some around collocating documentation, some around collocating tools, and many others. But basically, for the first time, we were able to say, yes, don't collocate tools just because we tell you so, or because experts tell you so, but look, there's actual data, engagement data, user engagement data that backs that up. I am going to speed up. What else have I done? Oh yeah, that was fun. So that's about data search. So here we've tried to understand how users look for data sets on existing portals. Again, that was dataeuropa.eu. So we had more than 800,000 of these search sessions, and we basically analyzed the types of queries and the types of user journeys on the portal, and we came up with new recommendations for publishers. Yeah, so for instance, one of the things we've discovered is that lots of queries have a spatial or temporal dimension to it and need additional support in terms of discoverability. And I'm going to wrap up because Jonathan is giving me the looks. So that's what we're working on right now. So we're looking at new ways to allow people to make sense of data sets, but also to extract insights from these data sets. And surprise, surprise, we're trying to do this with this new wave of AI technologies that has taken the world by storm, which is generative AI. So I have some screenshots here. These are from last night, just to illustrate where I'm going with the idea. So this is Bard as of last night. So what I've done here is I've asked Bard to find me a CSV dataset about London CO2 emissions. And you get a number of results. And not just results, you get the links to the CSV file, and you get a number of additional informations. Then, one of these was this data set, London Energy and Greenhouse Gas Inventory. I thought, well, can I find the latest version? Can I know anything about that data set to help me make sense of it? So I said, find the latest version of this data set. All of a sudden, I have information about the coverage, about the content, about the main categories in the data. All that without having to open a single CSV file. All that without having to have a data science degree all of a sudden to be able to process that data and understand it myself. Then I went and I said, could you write some code for me to generate the graph of this data? I mean, I sort of knew that that wouldn't work because the tool would have to have access to the data and so on and so forth. But actually what it generated is a notebook in Python where it would tell me, okay, so here you would replace the path where that file of that data set is, and here's what you would do to generate this graph. This is part of a bigger line of research that we're doing with my team at King's and at the ODI and in partnership with Microsoft, where we're really at the beginning of this journey. We're trying to understand how could one repurpose these generative AI chatbots to be able to use them in a meaningful way to allow for these sort of interactions and support data sense making beyond data professionals, essentially. I think I will leave it at that, and if anyone has any questions about anything that I have said, we have a bit more time later on. Thank you.
Great. So I'm Jonathan Gray. I'm at King's College London, and I'm in the Department of Digital Humanities. I also direct a Centre for Digital Culture at King's, and we also have a kind of Digital Futures Institute looking at how we can live well with technology. And I'm co-founder of the Public Data Lab, which is an interdisciplinary network of several hundred researchers in 10 different countries undertaking collaborative research about digital data, methods, and infrastructures. So I'm going to briefly say a little bit about some of the research that we've done on data portals. I think it's an interesting question, particularly for the theme of this conference and the state of open source. How are open data portals doing? So some of this has been published in this article for Data and Policy last year, outlining 3 approaches for studying data portals. And of course, there is a lot of research which has been done in this area through user research, interviews, ethnographies. That's extremely important. Also starting with issues and questions rather than starting with portals. But here I'm going to outline 3 approaches for studying data portals that start with asking the portals. So firstly, interface analysis. One approach is looking at how data portals change over time. So here are yearly snapshots from the Wayback Machine of data.gov.uk. And here is an example of replaying data.gov.uk at 1 year per second. I find it interesting how after an initial period of kind of social web experimentation with blogs and forums, we also see the interface settle down into a more pared down official design, which can also be seen as a kind of desocialization of the portal. We can also compare interface features. So here are snapshots of 87 different national portals, and use what we might think of as reverse wireframing. So usually we use wireframing to outline a design, but we can kind of go backwards and look at different features. So here is a network graph showing some of the different design features that one could identify through this process, again with 87 national data portals. And we can see in the middle some of the most commonly shared interface features, like search and different data themes, as well as things like dataset request mechanisms, forums, training resources, and so on. So another approach is software analysis. So in the case of open source data portal software, we can look at tens of thousands of commits over time and analyze plugins, themes, customizations, and so on. So this is a graph showing repositories associated, again, data.gov.uk in different phases of its development. And with the CCAN API, we can also look at which kinds of extensions are active and which are most shared. So we can see, for example, very commonly used extensions towards the middle, and then portals with heavy customization around the edges with more of their own collections of extensions. Thirdly, metadata analysis. So we can look at the shape of public sector datafication, so what kinds of things are rendered into data, kind of the temporalities of quantification, and so on. So here we can see, for example, the strong emphasis in the UK on finely grained spending data, which is partly in the context of political drives towards austerity and public sector funding cuts. And we can also see the availability of environmental data sets. So together with colleagues at King's, we developed a little Python library called Data Portal Explorer for gathering and analyzing metadata from CCAN APIs. So as well as looking at metadata about data sets, we can also look at metadata about apps. So here's a network graph of apps and their associated tags, including how data is being used for things like location-based personalization, like find a doctor, find childcare, find a school, decision-making and choice, so compare care homes, check food and hygiene, as well as what you could consider personal environmental optimization. I find this interesting, so like combining different forms of data sets to look at things like walkability, livability, and pleasantness. I think that was also something that came up in the previous panel when they're talking about like, how do we understand the impacts of the kind of cost of living crisis. This is a kind of creative process of trying to combine different data sets to be more sensitive to problems. So one of my favorite ones is how we could look at unsuccessful data requests across portals. So this is gathering and representing failed data requests from different data portals around the world as a way to surface interests, concerns, and curiosities for where data does not exist or where it's not made public, which can be taken as a way to study what's missing, rather than taking for granted what's missing. So thinking along with projects such as Mimi Anuaha's library of missing data sets, as well as feminist research on science technology in society. I love this quote from Susan Lee Starr on understanding relationships between lived experience, technology, and silence, which might be taken as an inspiration to consider what is absent in data portals and the data sets they contain, and ways of inviting participation around them. So those are 3 approaches which can be used to address all different kinds of research questions. I'm presenting this not just to say what we have learned, but in the spirit of thinking together how data portals might be reimagined and done differently in light of these kinds of research approaches. So as I mentioned, you can find details in this paper, and hopefully we can come back to some of these things in the discussion. On to Paul.
Thanks. Hey, so I'm the only one who's not a researcher here. I'm the industry person. So I work for Link Digital as CTO. We are part of the CCAN community. CCAN is open source data portal system, or more broadly is used for data management and metadata cataloging. At Link Digital, we're deploying CCAN for governments as well as organizations like the UN, and for data portals, as we've discussed now, but also for internal data management needs increasingly. CCAN's, after a couple of years of sort of quiet activity, the CCAN community is really developing a lot in the last, and more active in the last couple of years. One of those things has been triggered by recognition like this, where CCAN is now recognized as a part of the key digital public infrastructure for the SDGs. Also, we're seeing a lot of momentum because of these expanding use cases beyond the standard data portal use case. We're seeing a lot of momentum in the community around developing CCAN for more advanced search interfaces, integrating AI and semantic search, UI and UX enhancements, data processing, and in general, the community is very active now. As I say, key use cases, data portals, internal metadata catalogs. Increasingly, we're seeing use cases of data exchange platforms, so using metadata to discover data, but then having access controls around based on the metadata to open up data sets to internal users in large organizations. And even use cases of building visualization and analysis on top of CCAN. So for supporting internally data science teams to do analysis on top of a metadata catalog like CCAN. In reference to the research that we've talked about, so Link Digital has been running a project for the last 5 or 6 years called Data Shades. You can find it at datashades.info, where by hitting the CCAN API and building up a set of data over time about how different CCAN portals change, we not only have a snapshot of how CCAN is being used now, but also how usage of CCAN has changed over time. So in terms of publication frequency, different taxonomies that are employed via organizations and tags that are used. So this is a large raw data set on CCAN over the last 5 or 6 years. We've published it on GitHub. You can find it on the Data Shades organization on GitHub. We have not, as a company, done a lot of research on this raw data. There's a raw data set that's there to be used. It could be used in future research of a similar type that Elena and Jonathan have talked about. As I say, I think key potential here around looking at how data portal usage has changed over time. And I think that there's interesting things to build on top of a data set like we have with Data Shades. Like, for example, to go further into the data that's hosted on CCAN or other data portal software and do things like data quality analysis, do topical extraction from the way that organizations and keywords are used, and so on. So we'd like to see, it's sort of like an open call if anyone wants to use this data set in research. And in general, I'm going to try and turn back to us with Elena and Jonathan, but also to everyone in the crowd now. what type of future do we need for open data portals, and what type of research could be done based in the directions that we've discussed now, or in a data set like the data shades? How can a platform like CCAN or other data portal or metadata catalogs be developed further to suit AI better, and so on? So let's start and talk together. Do we move forward to the... how do we get to there? Click? How do we get to it from here? Let's see if anyone has any initial questions here. No. Okay. You're tweeting? Yeah. Live tweeting?
Data shades, data set. Data shades, data set.
Yeah.
There you go.
But I guess maybe I could start by asking both of you, you've both been involved in doing research on data portals and in building data portals for a long time. What have you learned about how data portals might serve as interfaces between the public sector and various publics with questions? And that's not just people who are interested in using data, but people who are interested in, say, issues like homelessness or river pollution. Or sorry, that's a big question.
Yeah. So, thank you for the question. It is a big question, right? So I think we've made lots of progress in data literacy, but there's still a long journey ahead of us, not just because the technology is changing and there is more and more data and more issues that can be, if not answered, then at least informed by data analysis. At the Open Data Institute, we're doing a little bit of that with a curated collection of data stories that look at pressing societal issues, and we're trying to answer these questions with existing open data sets, and also provide feedback to data publishers and the ecosystems about the ongoing challenges we have in using those data sets and keeping them up to date and linking them. So I think data literacy is an ongoing challenge and something that we should continue to use. But at the same time, there's lots of opportunities in using these new technologies that allow us now to ask all sorts of smart questions to tools that we have on our phone. And maybe then it's time to rethink access to data for those who aren't actually that interested in downloading the CSV file and seeing what it contains, but actually just getting an answer to a question.
Thank you.
Just to add to that, I think even in research, but also in general discussion around data portals, there's a lot of emphasis on the portal itself and functionality and features, and the real issue is around capacity, understanding of data, understanding of technology. Anyone who's worked with staff in government departments who need to support data portals, let alone the public who are apparently the stakeholders for data published on a data portal, will know that data literacy is a critical problem, and I don't see that problem going anywhere with AI. I see it possibly becoming more difficult because one needs to know what to ask for in order to ask for it. So I think that it's really a tricky thing. Of course, we want to build platforms that enable, afford certain types of experiences, and so we need functionality in platforms like CCAN and so on. But a lot more work needs to be done in terms of literacy, data literacy, and technical literacy more generally. So.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Cedric.
Hi. So data literacy is my bread and butter. And talking about data shades, so I'm Cedric Lumbion. I have an NGO specialized in capacity building and data literacy. And talking about data shades, and you mentioned quality, is there, as part of this project, or are there any research project interested in what are the patterns of problems found in data sets across different topic areas? Because to tie that back to data literacy, one of the time-consuming part of being a trainer is essentially composing a data set that has the typical problems found so that you can teach people how to deal with those problems. But generally, those problems are across several data sets, not grouped in one. So you have to take the time to find all the data set together. With AI, if you knew like what are the typical problems, you could say, generate me a data set that has this kind of features. But that would start from understanding, okay, in environmental data set, these are the typical problems found, etc. So is there any openings around that, whether research or technical work?
I'll just say very briefly, and then I'll hand over to you, Eleni. But as far as I'm aware, no. Obviously, there are projects that are not active at all anymore. I don't think, like Open Data Barometer and the Open Data Index from the Web Foundation and the Open Knowledge Foundation that did do some type of sort of best practices of these are the types of key data sets in certain topical areas that would be ideal if governments publish them. And I guess if we had best practices like that, we could then synthesize data sets from those core topical areas for use cases like you're describing. I think through the data we've collected on data shades, it would be possible at very least to sort of retroactively go back over the time we have that data and say, this is what governments are actually publishing, these are the topical areas we actually see, and these are the gaps. But it's interesting area.
I don't have that much to add. That's an excellent question. So I would say you could generate those use cases, but at the same time, I know lots of people who teach some sort of data management and data quality at various levels who would be probably interested in collaborating to create that resource, because as you said, it's if you know how to do it and you have a list of canonical data quality issues like completeness and coverage and whatnot, you could create that resource. So I'd say I'd love to talk more to see how we could make this happen.
Great, thank you. I think it's a great question. Kind of following on from what Paul was saying about things like the Open Data Index and the barometer. I think I would probably take a slightly different perspective. I mean, there are things like the Global Data Barometer. One of the things that I find most interesting about that kind of project is surfacing the situations around which data is considered to matter and the situations in which data is being published and learning around that rather than necessarily conventionalizing data. And one of the things I think is interesting in that project is how much, when you look at like biodiversity data, you quickly detect the role of international intermediaries in standardizing data. But the other issue is how much conventionalized data speaks to local problems and concerns. So I think there's a lot to be said for like the specific circumstances of data publication. Go on. Yeah, that's true.
I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about whether you're seeing synthesized data sort of enter these data portals. You talked about this idea of missing data and the things people are searching for that is missing, and we've sort of been talking around the growth of deep learning models, AI, and the role that will play in all sorts of decisions moving forward. That actually, without certain data present, we're perhaps perpetuating kind of certain blind spots. And whether you're seeing synthesized data appear or what that kind of looks like related to these open data portals where we just know we can't capture sort of everything, but we should be thinking more deeply or more complexity.
Yeah, so I'm not going to answer your question fully, but I can tell you, what I know. So the sort of research I've done mostly focuses on open government data portals. So those are official initiatives with standardized publishing practices, where government departments at various levels are publishing their data, and as such, we haven't seen, at least in the project I'm involved, we haven't seen any synthetic data sets released, because that's to some degree not part of the of what those initiatives are supposed to do. At the same time, if you look at the broader spectrum, data spectrum around shared data, then synthetic data sets in some domains like healthcare, where you have those sort of sensitivity concerns, is way more widely used. You talked about AI. Synthetic data sets are used a lot in AI, and not just for sensitivity issues, but because with generative AI, those sort of data sets are fairly easy to generate. So if you go to, say, a repository, an open dataset repositories like Hugging Face datasets, there's a tag synthetic datasets. There's lots of these datasets that are being published by the community, and that number is growing. And that's so. At the ODI, we run a program on data-centric AI, and we're inquiring emerging data practices in AI, and that research confirms this trend as well. And then there is a question really around how suitable those data sets are, really, if they're generated exactly with the same engines that we know have those problematic characteristics, not just in terms of biases, but also in terms of the degree to which they're curated by domain specialists. So I'd say yes, in AI, lots of them. On some of the other portals where they're standardized publishing practices, perhaps less so.
You had a question?
It was actually just picking up on your point about kind of investing in people rather than technology. I just wanted to kind of ask if there is any best practice in terms of how to maintain an open data portal, because it kind of seems like we ignore skills like maybe information professionals or whatever it might be. Is there kind of like recommendations for publishers as to who to employ, basically?
I mean, I think there's a lot of work in this area. I think one of the things that's interesting is how there are quite different perspectives on what data portals are for and who they're for and how they're supposed to work and therefore what features they should have. I would argue as a social researcher taking a kind of situated perspective, because you have very different kinds of contexts. For example, civil society data usage and so on. I would push for some of the more basic features like data request mechanisms. I feel like are really potentially important. Having those potentially being made public as well, as opposed to just direct to the institution, I think can be an interesting site of learning as well. But on the last point on synthetic data, I also think I just wanted to mention kind of weird data is a thing. I'm writing about it a bit in the book project that I'm working at the moment. Poisoned data, look it up, super interesting, right? So interventions to kind of, but I also think that as well as thinking about how you can get bias from when data is missing, it's also very important to think about how bias can arise where data sets exist. And data sets, I mean, when you look at data portals and go deep, there are so many weird data sets on there, you know, like frozen animals, right? There are like data sets of frozen animals in Peterborough. I mean, I'd recommend looking at poisoned data and then looking at the long tail of some of these data sets when you think about bias.
So, and there's a few questions. I'm thinking data taxidermy.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Terence Eden. One of the things I've noticed when I was in government is that lots of these data sets are pushed manually. There's an entry in the diary once a month or once a year to do it, and they get lost in the shuffle. What strategies are there to make these data sets sort of appear automatically as like the byproduct of those systems? Is that being looked into at all?
I think different portals. So I've worked with various national data portals mostly, and there's different schools of thought. I always liked the approach that, for instance, the French national data portal takes, where from the very beginning they had this approach where everyone can publish a data set. So it's not just government departments, there aren't these sort of monthly batches of data sets that are pushed out, but actually there's a much more community-driven process that requires curation, of course, and that relies on the community to provide reviews and maintenance. But, you know, sort of 10, 12 years down the line, that portal is still widely used. So actually someone should do that research and look at these different approaches and how they compare in terms of impact of open data that have been published. So that's an interesting project that we could do. But at the time, I would for the moment I would say there are different ways to do it, and they seem to be successful in their ways.
Yeah, I'll just say, like, from my experience on building projects like this, in government, it's almost always manual things. Like, someone does have a calendar reminder to upload that file on. But, you know, I've worked on a lot of internal data portals and also just sort of outside of that space, just in more data-specific startups and so on. And so the other approach is to have a very technocratic culture with data engineering, and that doesn't really fit with a lot of other aspects of the government model. And so I don't know where the sweet spot is between the calendar reminder to upload a file once a month to an automated data engineering system, but yeah, there's a big gap in the middle. Yeah.
I guess as that was the last question, we should thank you all for joining us, especially after lunch, for the post-lunch slot. And I hope we've persuaded you that data portals remain an area where learning and unlearning remains important. But thank you for joining us.